Melbourne's historic 2021 premiership has been dedicated to many of the club's great names: Danaher, Lyon, Flower, Barassi and Stynes, whose impact on Australia has extended well beyond his role in the early Irish experiment. So who was Jim Stynes, and just how did a kid from Dublin steal the hearts of the red and blue? In 1984, an 18-year-old Jim Stynes was filling in for a Gaelic football team when he was invited to a trial held by Ron Barassi and his Irish experiment team. While an Irish player or two is now commonplace in the AFL, just 40 years ago the country was an untapped 12th for footballing talent. That is, until coaching staff at the Melbourne Football Club hatched a left field plan to scout Irishmen playing amateur Gaelic football. Having just been accepted into college, Jim's father Brian allowed him to attend the trial, but warned him not to get picked for the sake of his academic career. At the trial, the prospects were put through a series of introductory and skill-based activities designed to identify if there were any players who possessed the credentials of an Australian rules footballer, including a lengthy speech from Barassi about the game, including the science behind kicking a ball, of which barely a word was understood by his young Irish audience. On the field, Stynes was naturally a standout to recruiters. At a lanky 199 centimetres and with a gut-busting running capacity, he was viewed as a promising ruck prospect. And despite his father's warning, Jim was indeed offered a 2-year contract, including accommodation, clothing, and $50 per match on top of his weekly allowance of $60. When Brian conceded that the opportunity was too good to pass up, Jim packed up home in Ireland and joined Barassi and the Demons on their return trip. And so, a fresh-faced Stynes arrived in Melbourne to begin his life as an Australian rules footballer, the journey that followed being described by his club captain Gary Lyon as the greatest footy story our game has seen. While Jim's athleticism stood out in Ireland, in Melbourne his lack of experience left him well off a place in the senior team, the Demons already possessing able ruck talent in Stephen O'Dwyer. Instead, Jim was to learn the trade. In injured club matches, he was shadowed by an assistant coach, given instructions on how to play, where to run, and what to do, as the Demons attempted to fast-track his development and knowledge of the game. His efforts, however, were not enough to break into the team, and despite a season in the under-19s that won him second in the best and fairest, he was still a way off earning senior selection. The next year, Melbourne found themselves in a precarious position. Jim was now too old to continue playing in the under-19s, and senior ruck performances limited his opportunities for development. As a result, it was deduced halfway through the season that loaning Jim to VFA side Paran would be the best interim option. Melbourne staff saw the VFA as the much-needed opportunity for Jim to develop both the skill and grit needed to play at the top level, and after 12 games for Paran, Jim returned to Melbourne with another runner-up best and fairest. At the age of 23, Stynes finally made his senior debut in round 3 of the 1987 premiership season against Geelong at Cardinia Park. Despite being dropped after his first match, he worked his way back into the side, and by the end of the home and away season, had solidified his spot for a first taste of finals footy. Jim was an exciting but raw talent, showing great athleticism, but was still prone to moments like playing on in the goal square or kicking the ball 2 metres to a teammate in place of a handball. Brain fades that had often seen him brought to the bench in the early part of his career. In the 1987 preliminary final, Jim lived his greatest fear, making a mistake at the crucial moment of a game, when Hawthorn's Gary Buckenara was awarded a free kick on the edge of the 50 as the final siren sounded, Hawthorn trailing by just 4 points. As Buckenara lined up for goal, an unsuspecting Jim Stynes ran through the mark, conceding a 15-metre penalty and a regulation set shot from 35 metres out. One of the league's known sharpshooters, Buckenara did not disappoint, the final score reading Hawthorn 11-14-80 to Melbourne 10-18-78, booking Hawthorn a spot in the grand final, although they would go on to lose to Carlton next week. While Jim was heartbroken over his mistake, an argument can be made that by missing 3 golden chances in the final minutes, The Demons should have had the game sewn up by the time Buckenara was kicking for goal. What it had provided Jim, though, was motivation, and he dedicated himself to training in the hopes of making amends for his teammates. His incredibly strong 1988 season was a big factor in Melbourne making the grand final, and he was voted their best player in a 96-point loss, again to Hawthorn. By the 89 and 90 seasons, he had become not only a mainstay in Melbourne seniors, but one of their most valuable players. Come 1991, Jim looked as if he'd been playing AFL his entire life, breaking Melbourne's club record for the most marks in a season with a league-leading 214. Having secured his first Melbourne Best and Fairest, all eyes turned to the highest individual honour of our game, the Brownlow Medal. Jim was the strongest Brownlow favourite to date, and the count didn't disappoint, holding off West Coast's Craig Turley to win 25 votes to 20. Jim's acquisition of the medal earning him a spot amongst the game's greats, being crowned Australian football's best player of the season, despite only having seen a Sharon for the first time just 7 years ago. In true Jim Stynes fashion, his father joined him on stage with Bruce McAvaney, and Jim attributed his success to the undying support of his family. 7 reliable seasons later, Jim played his final ever game in the 1998 preliminary final against North, after which he and the Demons came to a mutual agreement that it was time for him to make way for younger players. Retiring as a club legend, his career featured 264 games, 4 club best and fairest trophies, the club record for most consecutive games, and a Brownlow medal. His achievements later acknowledged through induction into the Hall of Fame in 2003, just 5 years after he retired, and then later immortalised again in a statue outside the MCG. However, Jim's retirement is far from where his story ends. Throughout his career, he'd always enjoyed helping others, in particular working with young people. When he met Australian actor Paul Curry, the two realised they had a strong common value. They wanted to see young people happy. And so, they launched the Reach Foundation in 1994, which has grown to become one of Australia's largest not-for-profit youth organisations. In their eyes, Reach would inspire young people to believe in themselves and get the most out of life. Today, the Reach Foundation operates at hubs all across Melbourne and Sydney, with thousands of young Australians attending workshops each year. By 2008, Jim was ready for a return to the world of football, expressing an interest in the presidential role at Melbourne. By June, current President Paul Gardner made way for Stynes. And then tragically, just 1 year into his presidency, on the 2nd of July 2009, Jim Stynes held a press conference to inform the Australian public that he had been diagnosed with cancer. A melanoma that originated in his back had spread to other regions of his body. Despite the news, Jim made it clear he would not be stepping down as president. By April of next year, it was revealed that Jim's health had taken a turn for the worse, forcing him to have surgery after the cancer had spread to his brain. In his spare time, filming a documentary about his life with close friends Jules Lund and Paul Curry, titled Every Heartbeat's True. At the end of 2011, Jim expressed a desire to focus his energy on his family and his health, and would thus seize his time as Melbourne's president. Notably, during his tenure, Jim had both increased membership sales and fought off any threat of relocation. With the support of his family, Jim applied himself to his health, combining alternative and Western medicine in an attempt to spend as much time with his loved ones as possible. On the morning of the 20th of March 2012, news spread across Melbourne that Jim Stynes had lost his battle with cancer at the age of 45. Aside from his footballing accolades, Jim had started a hugely impactful youth organisation, been awarded Victorian of the Year on 2 occasions, awarded the Order of Australia, and raised massive sums of money for charity. A Gary Lyon quote again captured the impact Jim had on the lives of those around him. Jimmy refused to let the game define who he was. It was just a part of him, and it allowed us to marvel at his determination, unwavering self-belief, resilience, strength, skill, endurance, and courage. Not only did Jim pave the way for overseas players to follow, but in many ways he rewrote what it means to be an Australian rules footballer, and showed what players who are fortunate enough to be in their position can give back to fans and the community. Now every year on Brownlow Night, the Jim Stynes Community Leadership Award is presented by his children Matisse and Tiernan, recognising an AFL player's outstanding service to the community. No one person epitomises that it's more than a game, like Jim Stynes. If you've enjoyed hearing about Jim's stories, then we highly recommend watching these two documentaries. Dublin's Jim on his journey to Australia and his footballing career, and Every Heartbeat's True on his inspirational journey to being one of Australia's most admired people. If you've got an aspect of your team you think we should take a look at this year, let us know in the comments and be sure to like, comment and subscribe for more footy content.